Hello everyone, my name is Ruoyun. I'm a Turing Research Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute. Welcome to this presentation about an integrated decision support tool for assessing the risk of labor exploitation on fishing vessels. Here, I will first give a brief introduction about the issue and challenge. In other words, what motivated us to develop such a decision support tool. I will then present the tool itself and finally illustrate how it works using a case example. In the last decade or so, many severe cases of labor exploitation on fishing vessels have come into light. It started with a series of investigative news reports by the Associated Press. Later, Greenpeace also released some reports with a focus in Southeast Asia. And these are followed by a lot of other work done by other news media, NGOs, and academic researchers. The isolated nature of fishing work at sea can lead to huge power imbalance between the fishers and their exploiters. The reported case can involve physical confinement, like some fishers were not able to leave the vessel for months or even years on end. They sometimes suffer from debt bondage or pay reduction, or even physical or psychological abuses. In extreme cases, fishers have died and been abandoned at sea. They are often forced to work excessive long hours, like over 20 hours a day, and their living and working conditions are often poor. Sometimes they don't have access to sufficient food and medication. I also want to add that although most of the attention so far has focused on Southeast Asia, it doesn't mean the rest of the world, including the global north, is immune to severe labor exploitation in the fishing industry. Here are two news articles reporting incidents in Hawaii and in the UK. They follow a somewhat different dynamics. For example, usually involves making use of legal loopholes, and they are less driven by the declining marginal profit. But it would be misleading to believe that labor exploitation is only a problem in the global south. These incidents of labor rights abuses at sea are challenging to investigate for a number of reasons. First, the seas and oceans of our world represent a huge space. It's often not as easy to gain physical access to locations where the violations actually take place compared to spaces on land. Relatedly, it is difficult to monitor this vast space, leading to low transparency about events happening at sea. The regulatory and legal landscape can be complicated too. In theory, the jurisdiction is shared between port state, flag state, and the coastal state. The country whose flag the vessel sails under, that is, the flag state, is supposed to carry out most of the regulatory duties. However, nowadays, it is widely known that many flag states basically allow any vessel to register as long as they're willing to pay, and they exercise minimal enforcement effort, leading to so-called flags of convenience. In response, there has been initiatives for port states to exercise more control through their power to inspect and detain vessels visiting their ports. On the high seas or international waters, it is a different story because it is beyond the jurisdiction of any single country, so monitoring and regulation becomes even more difficult. More recently, as more data sources related to marine activities becomes available, especially remote sensing data, there is increased interest in leveraging data and analytics to reveal hidden activities at sea. We can see that happening in academic articles and also paid platforms providing marine analytics and marine intelligence. Here I'm showing OceanMind and Starboard as examples. And there are also initiatives like Global Fishing Watch, which aims to create publicly available datasets. However, if we look at what the investigators and regulators in this space are actually using, the uptake of such tools and data seems very slow. For example, on the right-hand side, we're now looking at the ship risk profile currently used by Paris MOU. You can see it's largely based on static data fields like the type, age, company of the vessel, and there's some historical information about inspection and detention results. But there is no linkage with other data sources beyond what the port port state control already possessed. Intrigued by this, under another workstream of our broader project, we engaged with practitioners working on human rights investigations at sea to learn about their experience, demands, and concerns about the use of data and tech. Our participants voiced a number of problems around both data and tools. Data is said to be scarce, especially regarding what's actually useful. The quality of data is often poor, with a lot of missingness and inaccuracies. And the analytic tools developed are often detached from the local context or the actual needs of the communities. With regard to commercial tools, there is limited transparency about what they actually do. And they also mentioned a rush to develop high-tech solutions, which again can become misaligned from the actual needs of the people on the ground. And then the high cost is another obstacle for broader uptake. Additionally, our participants voiced ethical concerns around the use of data and tools. They worry about biases and misinterpretation through the abstraction into data. Increased data collection can facilitate surveillance as well when data is used beyond the original purpose without obtaining proper consent. And data and tech might also weaken the autonomy of the individuals and communities being affected, leaving them feeling disempowered. In the words of one of our participants, we don't need another tech tool that's divorced from people's experience and reality. You can read more about this piece of work in our paper that recently came out in the proceedings of the FACT conference this year. Therefore, we would like to develop a decision support tool that can, on the one hand, take advantage of the data and analytics available while still being mindful of the concerns raised, and we want to incorporate as many mitigation measures as possible into its design. We intend for the tool to be used mainly by port state control and civil society. For example, there are labor unions working on bringing exploitative practices into light to defend the rights of migrant fishers. Both port state control and civil society often operate under very limited resources, so would like to help with risk profiling to prioritize inspection or further investigation. The output from the decision support tool is not meant to be used directly as evidence in court. Next, I will first give an overview of the structure of the tool before getting into more details in some aspects. So the tool is implemented as a Bayesian network. Here, all the nodes are indicators of potential labor exploitation. They are organized into 3 levels, from the most general level on the left to more specific ones on the right. The ones on the right-hand side are what we call operational level indicators. They would be directly informed by data or intelligence available. This overall topology of how the indicators are organized is informed by expert judgment, not driven by data. For example, we adapted from results in a paper by Ford and Wilcox in 2022. In this study, they gathered a group of experts to come up with indicators of illegal fishing. Then we adapted it to fit into the labor exploitation context. In this way, we aim to mitigate potential biases following a data-driven approach alone. The edges in the graph represent information flow, how lower-level indicators inform higher ones. The exact functional relationships can be defined arbitrarily, but we try to stick with what's most intuitive to human, for example, a weighted average or some kind of logical operators. For example, maybe we want the higher level indicators to show risk as long as at least one of the lower level one is flagged up. And this dependency structure in the Bayesian network cannot accommodate missing data, because if we don't have information about one indicator but know something about its sibling, the information can still be passed on to the higher levels. So at the top level, we have 5 most general indicators. These are vessel validity, which is about whether the vessel tries to hide its identity, and owner and crew, about which country the owner and crew come from, and whether the crew is recruited through some recruitment agency if we have that information. The history and connections is about whether they are related to any known cases of labor exploitation or illegal fishing through shared individuals or companies. And fishing activities is mainly about the route of where the vessel have been fishing. And then finally, the working and living conditions of the crew themselves. At the lowest level, namely the operational level, we want to take advantage of structured data sets, including remote sensing data, ship registry data, and state-level indices. But we also want to account for information that might be obtained through manual investigation. This might be through open source intelligence online or maybe on-the-ground investigation, if that is possible. And there are some indicators that might be informed by both sources, and these are colored accordingly in the overview plot I just shown before. Next, to get some detailed views of a few aspects of this model, first we know that remote sensing data can be very helpful. In these models, it feeds into two top-level indicators. First, owner and crew, and also fishing activities. Regarding owner and crew, the historical route taken by the vessel indicates how isolated the crew were. If the vessel spends long periods at sea in distant waters, it will be very difficult for the crew to access services and support on land. With regard to fishing activities, we can see if the vessel selectively visits ports in countries with weak law enforcement, or if it loiters around marine protected areas. It might be possible to estimate what species the vessel was catching too if we cross-reference with ecological data. Then, I already mentioned about flags of convenience before. Here is a look at how the model estimates the risk of a flag being used as a flag of convenience. We borrow from another paper by Ford and Wilcox where they assess the risk using 3 state-level indices. Ownership ratio is, among all the vessels sailing under a country's flag, what's the proportion with the beneficial owner actually residing in that country. Then control corruption is measured by an index developed by the World Bank. Vessel fidelity refers to, among the vessels sailing under the country's flag, how much time do they actually spend in the exclusive economic zones of that country. And this slide also illustrates that how in a modular structure like what we're using, it is quite easy to implement more detailed modeling into its components. Another very useful source information is about the vessel's connection to known cases of illegal fishing and labor exploitation. As we know, such crimes usually operate in a network. Here we take advantage of the IUU vessel list compiled by TMT. IUU fishing here is short for illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So TMT combines lists from many regional fisheries management organizations into a single one. Then we also further amplify the list using ship registry data to include connections through shared owner, ship manager, beneficial owner, or operator companies. So the closer the connection is to a known offender, the higher the risk would be. And on top of this model, we also developed an interactive user interface to make the tool easier to use. We really want to make it as transparent and adaptable as possible. The model topology is defined in plain text that would be easy to edit. Then you can also see the interface on the right is basically showing the same hierarchical structure, but the size and color of the indicators are different. So the size is proportional to the weight of the indicator, and the color represents the level of risk. Numerically, the risk is on a scale between 0 and 100 for every indicator, 100 being the highest risk and 0 being the lowest one. And regarding color, low risk is shown in blue and high risk in red in this interface. In this way, it is quite easy to read out the major sources of risk from this diagram. And both the scores and weights can be updated through the interface too to help the user explore different settings, or they might want to override some of the scores produced by the data sources if they think the data sources are not of very high quality, not very reliable. We really want to make it easy for users to adjust to the local context and incorporate human expertise. We are also working on developing a standardized investigative workflow at the moment, and customizing and using this decision support tool can become part of this workflow. Finally, let's see how the tool works through a real-world case example. Here we're looking at a fishing vessel called Ruoyun 7886. This vessel was mentioned in a report by Greenpeace in 2021. There are some complaints from fishers on board this vessel, and the complaints matched many forced labor indicators developed by the International Labour Organization. I chose this vessel because it still seems active 2 years after the report came out. So let's see what it is doing nowadays. We can pull out the two IDs of the vessel, MMSI and IMO, through either the header of the remote sensing data or ship registry data. Likewise, we know that the vessel is sailing under a Chinese flag. And here is the first look at the route taken by this vessel during the year 2023. At the beginning of the year, it is in the Indian Ocean. It passed the southern tip of Africa towards South America. It lingered around the coast of Argentina for a while before crossing the Strait of Magellan. Afterwards, it went along the coast on the other side of South America, sort of did a loop before crossing the Strait of Magellan again at the end of the year. Now, the curious thing about this vessel is it did not seem to have visited any ports throughout the whole year. We can't be absolutely certain here, as the Strait of Magellan is very narrow. We may not be able to tell the difference between a few hundred meters off the coast versus in port. However, even if it did come into port at some point, it would be for just a few hours, no longer than a day. And personally, I would suspect some transshipment of either crew or the fish going on throughout this year. Here is how this vessel scores according to the decision support tool. There is some low risk regarding vessel validity. The risk is low because most of the information fields are complete and the vessel did not change its name or flag in the past couple of years. It is owned and operated by a Chinese company, so the Chinese flag does not seem to be used as a flag of convenience. There's some genuine connection going on there. However, some segments in the AIS signal seems to have hopped to another vessel at a different location at times. But these different vessels seem to have the same MMSI ID. Therefore, there is some suspicion that this vessel might be sharing its ID with another one, thus there's some risks being flagged up. And then the risk with regard to owner and crew seems quite high, but if we look closer, then we can see there is actually a lot of information we don't have. The current high risk is mainly driven by the profile of the owner country, that is China. We know that China provides national subsidies for marine fishing and that it has not ratified C-188, which is a Work in Fishing Convention, an international legal instrument to protect labor rights in the fishing industry. As we have seen, the extended periods at sea limits fishers' access to land-based services and support. If possible, some manual investigations might help to fill in the missing information, for example, regarding which countries the fishers come from and how were they recruited. As we don't have any information regarding the working and living conditions of the fishers either, we will skip the next top-level indicator. And in terms of fishing activities, the risk is medium. Again, the vessel spent long periods at sea without coming into port, given the suspicion that it might be trying to hide from law enforcement, but it did not loiter around marine protected area. Then, with regard to history and connection, we got a score of 0. We were able to locate the owner and operator companies from ship registry data, and neither of them has been found to be connected with vessels on the IUU list. So, put everything together, there is a lot of information still missing, and depending on the capacity of the user, they might decide to collect more data through manual investigation or inspection if possible, because that there are already some signals suggesting high risks in some aspects about this fishing vessel. For future work, we are still working on streamlining information retrieval because, as we have seen, the decision support tool needs to consult different datasets and platforms. We want to make it as smooth as possible. Other related work streams include the standardized investigative workflow I mentioned before, and we are also looking to conduct a landscape mapping of data and data-related tools in this space to make them better known to the practitioners. Now that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.